Sawadee-khap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. This is the first video of a 5-video series where I'm going to be sharing with you the 5 precepts. If you've learned that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no intoxicants, then you haven't learned the 5 precepts with the words of the Buddha. I'm going to introduce you to these 5 precepts and then invite you to study them more deeply. So welcome. Whenever you're studying the 5 precepts or any moral conduct related to the teachings of the Buddha, it's important to understand what he's doing is he's teaching you the natural law of Kamma. He's helping you to see this cause and effect, or this action and result, the results of your decisions. Because what you're doing on the path to enlightenment is you're awakening to the wisdom of the natural laws of existence. One of the primary natural laws that you're awakening to is the natural law of Kamma, helping you to see this cause and effect. It's not punishments and rewards. It's nothing mystical or magical. There's no being that's overseeing this, and it's affecting everyone, whether you're aware of it or not. If you're making wise decisions, it's going to produce wholesome results, or wholesome Kamma. And if you make unwise decisions, it's going to produce unwholesome results, or unwholesome Kamma. So what the 5 precepts are doing for you is helping you gain the wisdom of wise decision making around 5 important topics that if you make these decisions wisely, it's going to produce wholesome Kamma. But if you make these decisions unwisely, it's going to produce unwholesome Kamma. And remember, you're interested in learning, reflecting, and practicing. Because as you learn and examine these teachings and then reflect on them to independently verify them, you can see that they're true. But then when you're practicing these teachings, that's where you're going to see the results in your life, because you're making wiser and wiser choices. So your condition of your mind and your life is just going to gradually improve. So I'm going to start with the first precept in this video, and then in the subsequent videos, we're going to dive into the detail about all the others. We're going to be using the original words of the Buddha so that you can see this more illuminating language that he's using, because he doesn't teach as rules and commandments or black and white. So if you've learned no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants, this sounds like rules and commandments. This sounds like black and white. The Buddha's language around the 5 precepts is much more illuminating than this, and it helps you to more deeply understand what it is that he's teaching you and then how to actually practice these teachings. So let's get into the first precept. Here's what the Buddha has to say on the first precept. Abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. What the Buddha is sharing with you here is to have compassion for all living beings. And the purpose of this precept is to help you eliminate craving, desire, attachment. That's the longing, yearning, wanting things to be a certain way, because that's what causes discontentedness. So as long as the mind is longing, yearning, and having craving and clinging, the mind's going to experience discontent feelings, those pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. These are the conditioned feelings. Also, the primary purpose of this precept is to help you eliminate anger, hatred, and ill will. These are part of the pollutions of the mind. So it's not just a rule or a commandment. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. He's teaching you to cultivate this compassion for all living beings. And this compassion is concern for the misfortune of others. So when you're cultivating concern for the misfortune of others, you'll be able to now produce wiser and wiser decisions that leads to more and more wholesome results in your life. So the first thing you might decide to do when you're examining and investigating this teaching is, because he's talking about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, you need to know, what is a living being? Well, the Buddha provides details on this. In the 5 aggregates, he teaches you that each being is going to have form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. What form is the physical form of the body. Then feelings are those conditioned feelings, that there's going to be pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. Perceptions are your views and opinions about the world. Volitional formations are choices and decisions. So a living being is going to have free will. And there's a consciousness, or the mind. So you can independently reflect on this and see that this is true. This is something the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, and this definition holds up even today. that every living being is going to have form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and a consciousness or the mind. And then you can look at something that you know is not a living being, like this chair I'm sitting in. It has physical form, but it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have perceptions, it doesn't have volitional formations. It can't choose to pick itself up and walk down the street, and it doesn't have a consciousness or a mind. So here you can understand more closely what is a living being. Because oftentimes people talk about killing a tree or killing a plant or killing a bacteria or killing a virus, and you can understand that this language isn't actually true. That we're not killing a plant or we're not killing a virus or a bacteria because these things aren't living beings. They don't have all 5 aggregates. So really what we're doing is we're harvesting a plant or we're harvesting a tree or we're eliminating a bacteria or eliminating a virus from the body. So you can feel perfectly comfortable understanding this precept and the 5 aggregates that you're not causing any harm by going out into the world and choosing to harvest a particular plant. One of the things that we've learned over the years is that if we're going to harvest a plant, that we should maybe plant 5 or 10 more because this helps us to keep the health of the planet. So these resources are here for us in order to sustain our life. And then we understand that by eliminating a bacteria or a virus from the body, this isn't producing unwholesome kamma, which is unwholesome results. Instead, it's producing wholesome kamma or wholesome results because now the body is more healthy. So this is another way that we can independently verify that a bacteria and a virus is not a living being and that it's wise to eliminate these from the body. Because if we eliminated them from the body and it produced unwholesome results, then we would see that this is a living being and that's why the unwholesome results are coming back to us. But because we're eliminating this and it's not a living being, we can see that there's wholesome results that come back to us. The Natural Law of Kamma is the most unbiased teacher you will ever find. It's going to show you at every moment what wise decisions are you making because you're going to see wholesome kamma. And when you're making unwise decisions, it's going to produce unwholesome kamma. So in a situation where you're harvesting a tree, if you're planting 5 or 10 more, you're producing wholesome kamma. And the same thing with eliminating a bacteria or a virus. You're producing wholesome kamma because your body is now healthy, or you have a cleaner surface in your kitchen and now people aren't eating things that have bacteria or virus in it. So the first thing you need to understand is what is a living being? A shorthand way to think about this is you could think about an egg, a sperm, and a consciousness. In order for a living being to exist, they're pretty much going to have an egg, a sperm, and a consciousness. That's how they're going to originate. But this isn't true in all cases. And that's why the 5 aggregates is a better way to understand this. But this is a teaching that students oftentimes learn later in their practice. So as you're first getting started, if it helps you to just think about an egg, a sperm, and a consciousness, you could use that. But more readily, I would encourage you to understand the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. Now that you understand the precept and the 5 aggregates of how to determine what a living being is, you understand that your interest is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And what you're going to need to do is ask yourself, if you're in these types of situations, what would you do? Such as euthanasia of a human or an animal, termination of pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, or any government-sponsored killing, and a murder are all intentional killings. So you're going to need to ask yourself, would you participate in these things if you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings? Well, it's not so black and white. There's a big gray area that you're going to need to learn how to navigate. So I'm going to use one of the examples here to be able to help you understand how the same decision could actually be living compassionately in one situation, but in another situation, maybe not. So let's take the example of termination of a pregnancy. Now, my role as a teacher, I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing with the decisions in your life. I'm just here to help you understand this natural law of Kamma. And what you decide for your life is totally up to you. It's freedom of choice. But there are different situations that you might encounter with the potential of terminating a pregnancy that you might look to this precept for guidance. So let's look at this particular aspect of life. This is a medical technology that we now have available to us, and it can be very helpful in some situations. In other situations, it could be harmful. Now, some people consider termination of a pregnancy as a political issue, but I don't consider it to be that. It's a human issue. It's a technology that we have, and we can look at it and decide in what situations would it be wise and what situations would it be unwise. Well, if I'm a female and I have a fetus in the womb, and I know through medical technology that this fetus will never live a viable life outside the womb because maybe it just hasn't developed in such a way that it could live outside the womb. And by leaving it inside the womb, it could be threatening my life. And now in this situation, if I'm going to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, I need to understand that in order to have compassion, I need to have compassion for this being first. So if I allowed this fetus to continue to grow inside the womb, it could be putting my life at risk. And therefore, I wouldn't be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So in this situation, it could be a wise decision to terminate the pregnancy because we know that this individual, this being, is not going to live a viable life outside the womb. But in another situation, let's just say I was a female who was regularly getting pregnant and I was using termination of a pregnancy as birth control. And now maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 times I'm getting abortions. And in this situation, because I'm not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, I'm going to end up experiencing unwholesome results. As these surgeries and these medical procedures are being done, it's going to cause harm to this body. And now I'm going to experience the harm of having regular terminations of pregnancies over and over and over and over and over again. So you can see this action is the same. The individual is choosing to terminate a pregnancy. But in one situation, there's compassion for the welfare of all living beings there that has been considered. And that's why maybe that once in a lifetime situation, an individual terminating a pregnancy, there's not going to be any harm that comes to this body. But then in a situation where someone's regularly terminating a pregnancy, this can produce harm because you're causing harm to individual beings that are inside the womb that otherwise would be able to live a normal life outside the womb. So here you can see it's not black and white, and you're going to need to look at these closely. Here's another example. Say you have termites that are infesting your house, and now you know that they're causing damage to your home. Well, if you allow this to continue, it's not showing compassion for all living beings. The beings in that home aren't going to have a place to live. So you're going to need to look at how can I eradicate these termites? And you might choose to look online and see if there's a way to do it without actually killing these beings. But what you might come back with is that there is no way to eradicate termites without actually physically killing them. And in this situation, you might need to hire somebody to come and take care of that issue for you. Whereas if you allowed these beings to continue to eat your home, you wouldn't actually be living compassionately for the welfare of you and all the other people in that home. And this is the unfortunate part of being in the animal realm, is that the animals don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being. As a human being, if we ate wood, we would know to go out into the woods where it's not causing any harm to anyone, and we would eat those trees. But for termites, they don't have that level of consciousness, and now when they're eating this home, now this harm that they're causing is producing harm because they're experiencing the production of harm, so now harm is going to come to them. So you can see in this situation that you might need to eradicate these beings, but it's not something that you're doing with anger or hatred or ill will or any kind of craving. You've thought this through, you've made a wise decision, and now you're moving forward with that decision, and you can feel guilt-free that you haven't done anything that would be unwise in this situation. And that's why if you do this, there's no harm that's going to come to you. You're producing wholesome Kamma. The wholesome Kamma is that you have a house to live in. Whereas if you didn't do this, now you're not going to have a house to live in. And that's the unwholesome Kamma. So you need to be able to look at each situation closely. And typically what I do when I teach this in classes, courses, and retreats is I go through many examples to help students to understand this and to be able to then reflect on it and see how to practice. But since this is just a mini lesson, I'd like to invite you to study deeper. You can access this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, from our website. You can download it for free. You can take it and go print it. You can order it on Amazon, or if you're here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, you can pick these up at the temple where I teach. Just reimburse us for the printing cost. In chapter 7, you will be able to see more details about this particular precept. And if you study in the group learning program or you listen to any of the recordings where I've taught extensively about the 5 precepts, you'll learn more about this precept. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being interested to learn the teachings of the Buddha. And I'll see you in the next video, which is all about the 2nd precept. We're going to use the words of the Buddha and dive into this in a lot more detail. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Sawadee ka.